So this lecture could be potentially embarrassing, so you might not want to listen to it if you're a little squeamish about sex, because this is a lecture on writing the sex scene. And I think we're really very lucky that we can write sex scenes, because sex is a great way of exploring character. And I think that literature is actually better in many ways, because we can delve into the sexual lives of the people we're writing about. On the other hand, people have maybe done a little too much that way, and it's not really that good. So I've written literary fiction, genre fiction, and I've tackled both ends of this sex scene writing thing. And I think that I came up with a really good way of thinking about it in terms of what we need to do to write effective sex scenes. The first thing is to know how to write a scene with a beginning, middle, and end, because quite literally a sex scene usually has the same, a beginning, middle, and end, as does the act itself. So you want to make sure that you've got command of scene writing, and that your sex scenes are really following along the idea of a scene, with beats and meaning and an arc of action, so to speak. Okay, so the good news is that sex is a great and interesting way to highlight your character's behavior. The bad news is that often people write about it as if it's a gymnastics routine. We know all the body parts. We know more than we need to know about what those body parts are doing, and we focus on the action rather than the emotion. And I think the biggest hint about writing sex scenes is that we're more interested in the emotions, really, because we respond to the act, but we're thinking emotions and feelings for the most part in terms of your character. So the one way to make a sex scene extremely bad is to use euphemistic language for these body parts that we really don't need to know that much about. And I have read it all. And the example I have here for a vagina is was a silken purse. It was in some terrible romance novel that I read, and it was like, silken purse. I kept thinking of like something you put your jewelry in and put it in your jewelry box. It just really didn't work. On the other extreme is when people are very clinical about the language being used, that we have almost textbook Latin-based medical terms used for the parts that are engaged in the scene. So again, back to the idea that you don't want to focus on the actual body as much as you want to focus on the feelings that the characters are having, about touching someone, about connecting with someone. And yes, it's all very exciting, but what is this showing us about the characters? The other important part here at the bottom of the handout that you also have access to is that all sex scenes need to forward the theme of the story, the development of the characters, the arc of the plot. And when I was writing romance novels, I have a 3 sex scene rule. I just met you, wow you're a cool sex scene. The oh my God, where have you been? We've been separated from each other sex scene. And the yes, we will be together forever. We love each other irrevocably sex scene. It's 3-act sex scene. Boom, boom, boom. Some kissing and attraction along the way, but I didn't want to write a romance novel where the sex scene was the focus. And I know a lot of people want to read those, and a lot of people write them, and they love them. But I'm more interested, when I'm writing genre fiction, I'm much more interested in character development. So you have to decide what you write. If you are writing erotica, you really need to have a sex scene every 3 pages. Seriously. and it needs to be hot, and it needs to be, maybe there's more body parts than you have in a literary fiction piece where sex is just a metaphor for the confusing and complicated relationship these two characters are having. If you're writing realist fiction, you want to write a sex scene that is absolutely maybe ordinary, and you can, because that's realistic. There's no pounding of hearts and etc. However, I have read sex scenes, and it's the description of this is in this handout as well. One of my editors once handed me a book and said, "Oh my God, you've got to read the sex scene," and it involved two characters on a stampeding horse going through snowy fields, having sex in the saddle while this horse fled somewhere, and they end up falling off the horse, I think still connected, and in the snow, the cold snow. So meanwhile, I'm reading this, and I'm not at all excited about this. I'm cold, and I'm saddle sore, and I really just want a hot bath. So you have to think about your audience too. So my big recommendation for you is to read Elizabeth Benedict's The Joy of Writing Sex, A Guide for Fiction Writers. And she has really two ideas, and they're excellent. A good sex scene is not always about good sex, but it is always an example of good writing. You cannot cheese out and start using a bunch of adverbs and adjectives just because you're writing a sex scene. You have to stay in with specifics and details and character development and thematic development, because it's not a get out of jail free card. It's you're still writing. And then the relationships your characters have to each other, whether they are adulterers or strangers on a train, is critical to what happens in a sex scene. So, this is about two people coming together. That was not an intended pun, but this is about two people who are in relationship to each other physically. What is it doing to their relationship? So, and then this later talks about the traumatic sex scene on the horse. So, here are some just caveats about sex scene writing. Stay with the plot and stay with the emotions and sensations. While in a romance, the hero and heroine have to end up together, but it doesn't have to be a circus act, and this is true for literary fiction. The sex arrives out of their potential or growing connection. And then the idea of staying in the body, but not necessarily the body parts. Don't focus on the body parts. The sex doesn't have to be in the genitals, but can be in the fingers and rib cages and toes. And you don't have to explain everything. You sort of know what's going on. The other thing I learned from a writer, Kate Braverman, and she talked about avoiding fluids. And she was really talking about tears initially. She said everyone's showing a sad character, and the character's always crying. The same can go for sweating. The sweating shows exertion. Likewise, if there's fluids of other kinds, they show specific things that are happening to the character. So I think the job is to describe more than just say, oh, she's sad. Oh, there were tears on her face. Okay, we get it. But could you describe maybe internally what the sadness is? So avoiding fluids is good. In this handout, I have a number of sex scenes, and one of my favorites is a really bad sex scene. It's the kind of sex scene that when you're watching a movie, you're just rolling your eyes, and you can see that one of the characters is just not clearly getting it. This is from A.S. Byatt's novel, The Virgin in the Garden, and I have it written out for you in the handout here, and I certainly hope you will read it. The sex scene in Dream Boy by Jim Grimsley is a really amazing one and very powerful in this tiny literary book about a young boy coming of age and coming into awareness of his gay sexuality. and having sex for the first time with someone he actually wants to have sex with. And it's a really beautiful, I mean, sex scenes can be incredibly poignant and moving and not really erotic. I mean, what they're doing is erotic, but what is moving about it is the way that Nathan is taking his power and understanding who he is. So the most amazing sex scene that I've ever read, it doesn't even involve bodies. It is about porn. So in Toni Morrison's book, Beloved, there's this, Sepha and her husband Halle are married, and they're slaves, so they don't have a home to go to. So they have sex out in the cornfield after they jump the broom. And Paul D was one of the other male slaves, and he and his fellows were boiling corn or eating corn in the field while this is going on. They're watching the sex act. Well, they're not watching the sex act. They see the rustling of the corn, and they know what's happening. So this comes from Paul D's memory of that time. So I thought I'd read it. She remembered that some of the corn stalks broke, folded down over Halle's back, and among the things her fingers clutched were husk and cornstalk hair. That's Sepha. How loose the silk, how jailed down the juice. The jealous admiration of the watching men melted with a feast of new corn. They allowed themselves that night, plucked from the broken stalks that Mr. Garner could not doubt was the fault of the raccoon. What Paul D did remember was parting the hair to get to the tip, the edge of his fingernail just under, so as not to graze a single kernel. The pulling down of the tight sheath, the ripping sound always convinced her it hurt. As soon as one strip of husk was down, the rest obeyed, and the ear yielded up to him its shy rose, exposed at last. How loose the silk, how quick the jailed-up flavor ran free. No matter what all your teeth and wet fingers anticipated, there was no accounting for the way that simple joy could shake you. How loose the silk, how fine and loose and free. So, who knew that boiled corn could be this great? Anyway, I hope that this handout and the ideas about sex scene writing help you. The bottom line is you're writing a good scene with the beginning, middle, and end. You're sticking with character. You're focusing on internal feelings. And you're really just trying not to be cheating. Okay.